All right, hello everyone. Please welcome to the 8th annual ZFS Developer Summit. Um, I see there's a lot of people this year, so it's great to see lots of new faces. And thank you everyone for being sitting down on time. This has been amazing. Um, I'm Pavel. I'm going to be your MC for today. My main role is just making sure everybody is on time and that we don't get late. With that said, please welcome Matt, the co-founder of OpenZFS, to make an introduction.
Thanks, Pavel. Welcome everyone. It's great to see you all. Let me get started by giving some thanks. Okay, can you hear me better now? Okay, good. So first of all, I wanted to thank some outstanding individuals who have made this conference possible. They probably are not here because they're outside making the conference possible, but thank you so much to Karen. Karen is my coworker at Delphix. She works at project management, so she got all the catering, got everybody here, did all the organization. So thank you very much, Karen. And thank you very much to Victoria. She also helped to organize everything, dealing with all the vendors and all the sponsorships, making sure that we received all of the money that all of our generous sponsors donated. So thank you very much, Victoria. And lastly, thanks to Pavel for being the MC. Hopefully, I've made your job a little bit easier this year. We do have more break time, although we do have a lot of short talks. We have a lot of breaks, so hopefully the hallway track will be just as beneficial to you as the talks themselves. Thanks, Pavel. All right, and next we're going to thank our sponsors. The sponsors make this conference possible. Unfortunately, the ticket prices does not cover anywhere near the full cost of the conference. So thank you very much to our first diamond sponsor, Datto. Anybody from Datto here? Thank you, Datto. Next, Delphix, my employer. Thank you very much, Delphix. I know there's a lot of Delphix crew here. And Intel Software. Anyone from Intel here? No? Thank you very much, Intel. Diamond sponsor this year. And OS Nexus. Anyone from OS Nexus? Yes, hello. Thank you very much. Another diamond sponsor. Next, we have a slate of gold sponsors, Argo, Tech, OpenDrives, and Racktop. Thank you very much. Anyone from those companies here? I know there's a few of you. Yes. Hi, guys. And additional gold sponsors, IX Systems and Nexenta. Thank you very much. There's a few. And we have two silver sponsors as well, FreeBSD Foundation and rsync.net. Thank you. Awesome. So I wanted to talk to you about the code. Where does it come from? What does it mean? And do I really know Kung Fu? So first, let me give you some background information. For most of the life of OpenZFS, where has the code come from? Where have the new features come from? So almost all of the new feature development has happened on Illumos until recently. And there's a list here of some of the new features that have gone into it. And then there are other code repositories for ZFS on Linux, on FreeBSD, on macOS. And those are all pulling changes, porting changes from Illumos to the various platforms. And also contributing back bug fixes and stuff. So the code's flowing in all different directions that aren't necessarily shown by the arrows here, but I'm showing kind of the primary where most of the new features are flowing from one code repository to the next. And we created this OpenZFS repo, which is essentially just a mirror of what's in Illumos as a way to ease the process of getting changes into Illumos. But there weren't any, there's really nothing unique about it as far as the code base goes. It's mostly just a process improvement. So recently, though, we talked about this a little bit at last year's conference. A lot more new feature development has been happening on ZFS on Linux. So if you look at like the past year or two, most of the new features have been developed first for ZFS on Linux, And then those have been ported to other platforms like Illumos and FreeBSD. This works well. We've been putting a lot of effort into this porting and making sure that OpenZFS is great on every single operating system. But porting the code is kind of a pain. It's work. Some platform is always a little bit behind. Usually when the code when some big new feature is ported to another platform, there's additional eyeballs. People are looking at it and they're saying, oh, like, what about this little thing? What about that little thing? We could have made this a little bit better in some way. And it's like, yeah, that's great. I wish that you had told us that when we were doing the original code review, when we were integrating it. Then, there's a bunch of that results in a bunch of technical problems like, oh, do we make the change now while we're porting it? Do we just port it as is and then submit patches back upstream? In any case, it's like a lot of busy work that is not really what we want to be doing. I think everybody would rather be developing these cool new features, finding and fixing bugs, and not dealing with like whether you call, malloc versus kmalloc versus like some other thing. So one of the goals of OpenZFS from day one was to have one code repository, one source of truth that just works for lots of platforms so that we don't have to do all this porting and worrying about differences and making sure that the differences are minimized because there's just one OpenZFS codebase. And honestly, I was a little skeptical that this would ever happen because it's a huge amount of work. The differences in functionality between, say, ZFS on Linux and ZFS on Illumos or FreeBSD are very minimal, but there are the number of lines of code difference is quite large. So it's a huge amount of work from a code base point of view. It's a huge amount of work from a process point of view of how we do development. And there's also cultural changes, right? Like each operating system has their own community of folks that, are FreeBSD folks first before they were ZFS FreeBSD folks. And likewise on, Illumos and Linux. But the FreeBSD folks have stepped up and they've made this happen. So what they've done is taken as a starting point the ZFS on Linux repo, and we're in the process of making that work on FreeBSD. So we'll have one code repository that works on both Linux and FreeBSD, it's going to be called OpenZFS for Linux and FreeBSD, and it'll be one. So just like we have one code repository on ZFS on Linux today that builds for like Linux kernel 4.15 and Linux kernel 5.0, and like there's differences, and we have to have, the compiler, we have to have like, a bunch of kind of icky code to deal with that, but it needs to be done. The same thing is going to be true of Linux versus FreeBSD, where you're going to just have one code base, and there might be a few pound defines in some places, a few places where there's two versions of a file, one for Linux, one for FreeBSD, but those should be very minimal. Like I said, so this is a goal from day one. So why hasn't it happened until now? Aside from the things I already mentioned, this is a lot of work. So huge props to the folks, the team led by IX Systems engineers. Just a couple of examples of why it's so hard. So first of all, FreeBSD uses a different compiler. So they recently switched to LLVM. And so there's lots of GCC isms because Illumos and Linux both basically just use GCC. So all those compiler isms need to be factored out. We're trying to do things the right way. We're trying to not just have pound defines everywhere, macros all throughout the code base. We're trying to do the right thing. Like for example, when there's some function names that conflict with functions that are provided by the base operating system in FreeBSD, trying to just saying, all right, like we're just going to bite the bullet, do it the right way, rename all the ZFS ones so that we don't have to worry about like using macros to pound define things, to change the names of things, or like scope header files. We're trying to do it the right way to set us up for long-term success. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides. In terms of the status, so it's a work in progress currently, but the code is functional. You can run it on FreeBSD, it runs the test suite on FreeBSD and doesn't crash. So that's like a lot of code is working. In terms of upstreaming and actually making this one combined repo, we've already had about more than 60 pull requests landed into the ZFS on Linux repo that refactor out the Linux specific bits to make it to prepare the code base for integrating with FreeBSD. There's about 10 that are currently open. There's still a lot of lines of code left to land, but most of that is the FreeBSD specific versions of like the ZPL and other higher levels that interface with the operating system, the rest of the operating system directly. So what's left to do? Like I said, the code basically works. So there's not a lot of new code that needs to be written at this point, but it's still a lot of stuff that needs to be upstreamed, and we still need a lot of code reviews. So if you are very excited by this, one great way you can help out is by testing it. If you search for ZOF for ZFS on FreeBSD, you'll find the packages for FreeBSD that you can download, and code reviews. So if you take a look at the code reviews that are open against ZFS on Linux, those are all need to be done. And the one more thing that's in progress is FreeBSD BuildBot integration, which I'll talk about in a moment. So I just said ZFS on Linux a bunch. We're going to be renaming the ZFS on Linux repo. So this is a change that's coming real soon, probably before any of the FreeBSD stuff ships. Hopefully by the end of the year, maybe maybe we can get together at the hackathon, sort out all the details there. But we're just basically moving the ZFS repo that is currently ZFS on Linux into the OpenZFS account. So the URL will change here, but it's the same code base starting from what we have in ZFS on Linux, but we're kind of acknowledging that we're adding FreeBSD support to that. But the ZFS on Linux or ZOL project is not going away. We're just renaming the code base to reflect the fact that it's going to be the ZFS source code repository for not just Linux, but also FreeBSD and maybe potentially some others in the future. So the website that you see here, that's going to still be there. The mailing list will still be there. It'll still be called ZFS on Linux because it's mostly people trying to use ZFS on Linux, and the IRC channels and all that stuff will still continue to exist. But there will be a few changes. So today, when you submit a pull request against ZFS on Linux, it gets automatically built and tested for more than 10 Linux distributions. And you develop on your distro of choice. You don't have to compile your code on CentOS 6 or whatever, but the project ensures that your code works on all of the supported distros of Linux. And the way that we do that is with this build bot that takes your code and compiles the pull request on all these dozens of different platforms. But soon, when you submit a pull request against OpenZFS, it's going to be automatically built and tested for those 10 plus Linux distros and also FreeBSD. So again, you're going to develop your changes on your distro and operating system of choice, and the project is going to ensure that your code works on all of the operating systems and distros, including FreeBSD, that are supported by OpenZFS. And just like with developing on Linux, your both Linux and FreeBSD developers are going to be primarily doing their development against the OpenZFS master branch, and that's where their work will first be publicly available. Let me see. AV problems. Is this? Okay, great. Awesome. So, show of hands. Who uses ZFS on Linux? Okay, that is a lot of people. Who is using the master branch of ZFS on Linux in production? Like your product is deployed, like not many people. Okay, so the other 90% of you presumably are using releases of ZFS on Linux. So I want to just briefly touch on this. So there's several distributions of ZFS on Linux. So for example, Ubuntu, they take a ZOL release like 0.8.2, and they package that up. They may apply some, very tiny minimal diffs, and then they ship it in, Ubuntu 1804 or whatever version they are shipping. Going forwards, FreeBSD is going to be doing basically the same thing. So, FreeBSD 13, hopefully, fingers crossed, will be shipping a release of OpenZFS. So FreeBSD can basically be thought of as like a distribution of OpenZFS, similar to how like Ubuntu is a distribution of ZFS on Linux. And that next major release will be called OpenZFS 2.0 for Linux and FreeBSD. So it will not be ZOL 0.9, it will not be ZOL 1.0, it will be OpenZFS 2.0 for Linux and FreeBSD, and it'll be coming in 2020. Month yet to be determined. Cool. Thanks. So what's going to be new in OpenZFS 2.0 relative to ZOL 0.8? So FreeBSD support and whatever else is in the master branch. There's a list of things here that are already in the master branch. If you want to learn more about them, most of these, we've had talks about them at this conference previously, in previous years, or one of them coming later today about Metaslab performance. And additionally, whatever other features are done when FreeBSD support is ready to go. So we aren't going to be holding the release for that one last feature that we're still waiting for. The only feature we're holding the release for is FreeBSD support. But here's a couple other big new features that are in the works that might or might not land in OpenZFS master in time for OpenZFS 2.0. Looking a little bit further ahead, after OpenZFS 2.0, the goal is to have approximately annual major releases of OpenZFS. So these will be like OpenZFS 3.0, 4.0, 5.0, etc. And in addition to those features that you saw on the previous slide, Jorgen, who's here, I'm going to put you on the spot, is working on adding Mac OS X support as well to the OpenZFS repo. So I don't think this is going to be in 2.0, but this is kind of the future direction that we're looking for the OpenZFS repo, and to increase this consolidation so that we're working on developing new cool features and fixing bugs and adding great performance, and not on moving code from one place to another and answering questions about, is that, I know that was in like ZOL master, but like, is that in OpenZFS? Is that, is that in, FreeBSD 11.3 yet? I'm not sure. Instead, one code base to rule them all. I have a couple more notes, but I will pause here to see if there are any questions about this. Yes, Seb. Yeah, so the question was, if I'm developing a feature on Linux, because that's the platform that I'm running or care about, how do we set the expectation and make sure that it's actually going to work on FreeBSD and OS X and all the other platforms that are supported? I think that this is, so it's, a big part of it is cultural, which is, and it's the job of the leadership to enforce that culture. So to give a smaller example, we've experienced this today. I know Seb, that like we developed some feature against Ubuntu 18.04 on Linux, and it's running some very recent Linux kernel, and then we open a pull request, and it's like, oh, that like some test failed on CentOS 6 that's running a kernel that's like, I don't know how many years, 10 years old? Is that unreasonable to say it's 10 years old? All right, it's 10 years old, it's a 10-year-old kernel, and we're like, we do not care. But we do care about getting our changes upstream so that we aren't stuck with maintaining them forever. So, part of it is the job of project leadership, which is, that falls on me and on Brian a lot, to make sure that we're providing the right balance of, being able to credibly tell people like, look, it's actually important to the project that your code runs on CentOS 6. And so like, that's why you need to get it working. And also helping people to actually do that. So one, helping them with the automation, which does the runs, and actually I think does a pretty good job of providing results that you can actually use on your own to go debug with the test output and whatnot. But also, I know Brian has done a lot of work to actually hold people's hands and be like, yeah, it didn't work on CentOS 6. Like, just hold on. I'm going to go take a look at those results. I'm going to go like dig in. And I think that's something that project leadership is going to have to do. And I think that also, we're going to be asking folks who are the primary consumers on FreeBSD to do some help with that as well. So it's not 100% on the pull request submitter to get it working on FreeBSD. Like, it needs to work on FreeBSD before it's integrated. But we're going to do our best to help that not be a super burden on the pull request submitter. Hopefully that addressed it. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely ambiguity there, and I think it's something that we're gonna have to try and see how it works. And like to the CentOS 6 example that we just talked about, like we're actually EOLing CentOS 6 in ZOL. So like it is a trade-off and it's a balance. And like I think that FreeBSD is here to stay. But I think that there's always going to be evolution of like which versions of FreeBSD and which versions of Linux and whatnot do we really need to put in the effort to maintain. But yeah, at the end of the day, like it comes down to the like maintainers saying like, no, your project cannot integrate because it doesn't work on platform X, which is a supported platform. And like we have to draw the line there, and not be like, oh, sure, you can just add an if-def Linux, and like your whole new feature isn't going to work on FreeBSD. Like, no, like we're not going to do that, and that's kind of our responsibility as like the people that actually integrate the code into the OpenZFS repo. Other questions? Okay, cool. So I've just a couple more things to mention. Diversity and inclusion. We talked about this a bunch last year. I wanted to just give a quick update. Since then, we have implemented a code of conduct. We actually wrote our own code of conduct with kind of heavy influence from others that we had read. But the reason we did this is that we wanted it to have like our voice and to reflect our values. And so I want to thank everyone who helped to give their feedback to improve that. I've learned a lot through the process, and look forward to hopefully that continuing. Thanks to the folks who helped make this happen, Karen and Brian and myself. If you have any questions or if you encounter any unwelcome behavior in the community, let us know through this email address, and we will be in touch. And the last thing I want to mention is that another thing new since last year's conference, and also prompted by discussions at last year's hackathon, is monthly video calls. So every month we have video calls on Zoom where we're talking about proposed new features, how to move open pull requests forwards, and other things like that. They're recorded, they're on YouTube. There's a Google Doc with very detailed meeting notes if you don't want to watch hour-long video each month. So you can join us for this month's meeting, which is next week. And there was one talk that was scheduled for today, Jason King's talk about securing the cloud with ZFS encryption. Unfortunately, he is ill and couldn't make it today. So he's going to give his talk at the meeting next week. So you can call into this if you want to learn about like how to use ZFS encryption in practice, or if you want to talk about any other open items. So that's it. Thank you very much.